On the road again, and the weather was everything we were told to expect. Cold, wet, and misty. The only landmark on the otherwise dull journey from Fortrose to Dunrobin Castle was the Glenfiddich distillery, and that was closed. But as we continued up the Highland coast, the weather brightened a little. Dunrobin Castle, the home of the Dukes of Sutherland, and it's now open to the public. We were greeted by the sound of bagpipes as we approached the main entrance, and the intriguing history of the castle came to mind. More of that in a moment, but as far as I was aware, there was no history of the English butchering and murdering Highlanders in this part of the Highlands, so I thought it safe to try and make contact with the natives. Oh, how the times change. Big cat hunting trophies in the Duke's private study. With a collection of military uniforms close to hand should the need arise. The difference between men and boys as the price of their toys is by no means a modern expression, it's clear from this visit to the castle. But Dunrobin Castle is also part of an intriguing story. Most people know the name Wallace Simpson and the story of the abdication of Edward VIII. But he was 40 years old in 1936, and must surely have had other lovers before Mrs. Simpson. Apparently he did. Several, but the interesting one here is a debutante by the name of Rosemary Leveson Gower. Rosemary, daughter of the Dowager Duchess of Sutherland, was said to be an English rose, high-born, high-spirited, good, kind, charitable and beautiful. This was in the dawn of the era when it was, at last, becoming acceptable for a royal prince to marry a commoner, rather than being forced to marry a foreign princess. Queen Mary later forbade the marriage. She had heard that there was a strain of madness in Rosemary's mother's family. Also, her uncle was a gambler, and her mother a divorcee. This just would not do. Edward made up his mind there and then that he would never marry anybody chosen by his parents, and that he would make his own choices, and that he would go on to marry not the daughter of a divorcee, but a twice-divorced American. And what happened to Rosemary? Well, she went on to marry Lord Ednam, whoever he was. Rosemary was killed in an air crash over Kent, aged 36. The incident is still shrouded in mystery, and Edward VIII was scheduled to be on the same plane but cancelled at the last minute. Oh, what a story. And so on to a wet and windy John O'Groats, just a week after I was standing at Land's End. Taking a wildlife cruise in such wet and windy weather may sound like being on the fringes of madness, but it turned out to be a great success. The tour was around the island of Stroma. Stroma is an extremely isolated place. Life on the island was very difficult due to its inaccessibility. Until as late as 1894 it had no landing place, which meant that boats had to be landed directly on the beach and pulled up above the waterline. Lack of population was always a problem, and by the early 19th century, around 30 families, numbering 170 people or so, lived on Stroma. Stroma's population fell even further through the first half of the 20th century, leading eventually to the island's final abandonment. By the 1950s, the 5-member Manson family had become the last native inhabitants of Stroma. The Mansons finally left Stroma on December the 6th, 1962, bringing to an end thousands of years of permanent habitation on the island. It is now an island of ruins. Churches, farmhouses, and other monuments to an extinct human population. But just as humans abandoned Stroma, the wildlife returned. And in droves. Seals, dolphins, orcas, and thousands upon thousands of seabirds. There are no permanent human inhabitants on this island of ruins. The only other inhabitants of the island are sheep, and colonization of the island by the animal community is just about complete. After returning to John O'Groats, it was a short drive to Thurderstoft Farm and our bed and breakfast for the night. An enormous place which we had to ourselves.